The rich man pressed the horn, and the German shepherd lowered himself across the front tire, as if the entire parking lot had become his post. Staff Sergeant Caleb Turner saw the movement from 20 yards away. 1 second, Atlas had been standing beside the rescue center's donation table, calm beneath the string lights and late autumn sky. The next, the sable German shepherd had slipped free of the loose lead and crossed the asphalt with quiet purpose. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply lay down in front of the black sport utility vehicle and fixed his amber eyes on the rear of it. The driver's door opened. Victor Langley stepped out in a charcoal overcoat that looked too clean for the gravel lot. His silver watch flashed beneath the lights. Behind him, the vehicle gleamed like polished stone. "Move the dog," he said. Caleb walked closer, boots worn at the heels, hands open at his sides. "Atlas," he called. The dog's ears moved, but he did not rise. Instead, he turned his head toward the trunk. Victor exhaled through his nose. "This animal is blocking my car." "He knows," Caleb said. Around them, volunteers paused beside folding tables stacked with donated blankets, pet food, and silent auction baskets. The fundraising event had been almost over. Victor had just stood beneath the center's faded banner and announced a contribution large enough to repair the leaking roof, replace the old kennels, and keep the doors open through winter. People had applauded. Megan Price, the center manager, had nearly cried with relief. Then Victor added the condition. The rescue property would be transferred to his development company within 6 months. The center could remain open in a smaller building across town. The quiet senior dog yard, the recovery field, and the old cottonwood trees would be cleared for luxury townhomes. Caleb had said nothing in front of the crowd. Atlas had. Now the dog rose, walked along the driver's side, and stopped behind the vehicle. He pressed his nose to the seam of the trunk, inhaled, then sat. Caleb felt the air change. He knew that posture. Atlas had been trained to indicate a person or animal in distress without scratching or barking. Calm body. Fixed stare. Sit and wait. Victor stepped between Caleb and the rear of the vehicle. There are only business materials inside. Atlas touched his nose to the trunk again. Then he looked at Caleb. Trunk. Caleb. Trunk. The pattern repeated. Megan approached, holding the unsigned donation agreement against her chest. "Caleb," she said softly, "please do not turn this into something." He heard the fear beneath her words. 27 dogs depended on that building. 4 employees depended on those paychecks. Victor smiled as though he had already won. "I will increase the donation by $50,000, he said, "provided your volunteer takes control of his dog and lets me leave." Caleb looked at the checkbook in Victor's hand, then at Atlas. The German shepherd had returned to the left rear tire. This time, he did not lie down. He stood squarely behind the vehicle, refusing to let it reverse. A faint sound reached Caleb through the cold evening air. One soft tap, then another, from inside the trunk. Victor's smile faded. Caleb moved closer. "Open it. You have no authority to make that request." "Then we wait for someone who does." Victor glanced toward the crowd. Several phones were already raised. Megan whispered Caleb's name again, but Atlas did not move. Caleb rested one hand lightly on the dog's shoulder. The muscles beneath the sable coat were steady, not fearful. Certain. Victor opened the driver's door and motioned to his chauffeur. "We are leaving." Caleb stepped in front of the hood. Atlas settled behind the rear wheel. Man and dog held their positions in silence. Victor looked from one to the other. "Name your price," he said. Caleb met his eyes. He already gave you his answer. Somewhere beyond the string lights, a siren turned onto the road. Atlas stared at the trunk, and from behind the dark glass came one more quiet tap. The siren grew louder until red and blue light washed across the rescue center's white walls. Officer Daniel Brooks stepped from the patrol car and surveyed the scene without rushing. He knew Caleb well enough to recognize the difference between defiance and concern. "What happened?" he asked. Victor answered first. "A volunteer and an uncontrolled dog are preventing me from leaving." Caleb kept one hand on Atlas. "There is something in the trunk." Daniel looked at the German shepherd, then at the rear of the vehicle. Atlas remained seated, gaze fixed on the seam below the rear window. Another faint tap sounded from inside. This time, everyone heard it. The crowd went quiet. Victor folded his arms. "Business supplies shift during transport." Daniel walked to the back of the vehicle. "Open the trunk, sir." Victor's expression hardened, but his voice stayed smooth. On what grounds? On the grounds that several witnesses heard movement from a closed cargo area, and your vehicle is being held on private property during an active concern for animal welfare. The words landed without drama. Victor glanced toward the raised phones, then pressed the key fob. The trunk lifted slowly. Cold air rolled out, carrying the smell of leather, paper, and something warmer beneath it. A gray moving blanket covered a large plastic carrier. Atlas rose at once. His tail remained low, but his entire body leaned forward. Caleb stepped beside him. Daniel removed the blanket. Inside the carrier lay a young German shepherd, perhaps 8 months old, black and tan with wide brown eyes. She was awake, but tired. A stainless steel bowl had tipped onto its side. A bright tag shaped like a purple flower hung from her collar. Atlas gave a soft sound deep in his chest and moved closer. The young dog lifted her head. Their noses met through the carrier door. She answered with a faint whine. Caleb felt Atlas tremble beneath his hand. Her name is Ruby, Victor said quickly. She belongs to a private client. Daniel examined the latch. Then you should have no trouble providing records. Victor reached for a leather folder near the carrier. Caleb noticed how fast he moved. Too fast. Daniel stopped him with a raised hand. Leave everything where it is. Megan came closer, the donation agreement still clutched against her coat. Relief and fear crossed her face at the same time. Why was she covered? Victor looked at her as though the question was beneath him. She becomes anxious in crowds. Atlas sat beside the carrier and refused to look away from Ruby. Caleb studied the purple flower tag. The design stirred a memory. A faded sign on a rural road. A family kennel outside Golden. Carter Shepherd Farm. Closed 2 years earlier after a dispute over the land. Caleb crouched beside the carrier. Where did you get her? Victor did not answer. Ruby shifted, revealing a microchip registration card tucked beneath the blanket. Daniel picked it up with a gloved hand. The printed owner name had been crossed out. A new one had been added in different ink. Victor Langley Holdings. Caleb looked at Daniel. Daniel's expression changed only slightly, but it was enough. This does not look like standard ownership paperwork. Victor gave a thin smile. My attorneys handle acquisitions. Dogs are not real estate, Caleb said. Victor turned toward him. Everything has a value. Atlas pressed one paw against the carrier door. Ruby mirrored the movement from inside. Megan lowered the unsigned agreement. The rescue center's future had been tied to Victor's money for less than an hour, and already the cost of accepting it had become visible. Daniel called animal control and requested a microchip scanner. Victor stepped away from the vehicle and began speaking into his phone in a low voice. Caleb watched him, then looked again at Ruby's tag. The purple flower had a tiny number engraved on the back. 17. He had seen that number before on an old property map attached to the rescue center's land records. Parcel 17 belonged to the Carter family. Atlas touched his nose to the tag and looked up at Caleb. The dog had not only found Ruby. He had found the first piece of something Victor had worked very hard to hide. Animal control arrived 20 minutes later in a White County van, and the parking lot settled into a quieter kind of tension. The technician scanned Ruby's microchip while Daniel photographed the carrier, the altered registration card, and the contents of the trunk. Victor stood several feet away beneath the string lights, speaking into his phone with the patience of a man accustomed to letting other people solve inconvenience. Caleb remained beside Atlas. The German shepherd had not left Ruby's side. Whenever the young dog shifted inside the carrier, Atlas leaned closer, steady and watchful, as though his presence alone could keep her calm. The scanner beeped. The technician read the number twice, then entered it into a county database. Original registration is still active, she said. Carter Shepherd Farm. Owner listed as Helen Carter. Victor lowered his phone. That record is outdated. Daniel looked at him. Then the transfer paperwork should show when ownership changed. Victor gestured toward the leather folder. It does. Daniel opened the folder on the hood of the patrol car. The first document appeared official, with signatures, dates, and a county seal. The second was a bill of sale. The third authorized transport of Ruby to a private facility. Caleb noticed one detail before Daniel did. Every page listed Parcel 17 as the place of transfer. The same number engraved on Ruby's tag. The same parcel marked on the rescue center's land map. Why does this dog's paperwork reference land? Caleb asked. Victor smiled without warmth. because the kennel and property were part of the same acquisition. Megan stepped closer. The Carter property borders ours. Caleb looked toward the dark field beyond the rescue center fence. He had walked that boundary dozens of times with Atlas. On the far side stood an abandoned farmhouse, a collapsed sign, and a locked gate marked with a faded purple flower. The image returned sharply. Carter Shepherd Farm. Caleb turned to Atlas. You have been there. The dog's ears lifted at the direction of his voice. Ruby pressed her nose through the carrier door. Atlas answered with a low, gentle breath. Daniel compared the signatures on the transfer form. These do not match. Victor's face remained composed. My attorneys can address any clerical difference. The county can address it first, Daniel said. He instructed the technician to take Ruby into temporary protective care. Victor objected, but Daniel did not raise his voice. Until ownership is verified, she stays with the county. The carrier door opened. Ruby hesitated. Atlas stepped back, giving her room. When the technician clipped on a lead, Ruby moved slowly from the vehicle and stood beneath the parking lot lights. Atlas approached with careful steps. They touched noses again. This time Ruby's tail moved once. Caleb crouched beside them and examined the purple flower tag. Beneath the number 17, a second line had been scratched almost smooth. He angled it toward the light. A name appeared. Lily. Megan inhaled softly. Lily Carter? Caleb looked at her. You know her? Megan nodded. She used to come here with her grandmother. 2 years ago. She had a German shepherd that followed her everywhere. Caleb's hand rested on Atlas's collar. The old leather was worn, but near the buckle a small shape had been pressed into the surface. A flower with 5 petals. Purple once, perhaps, before time and weather stripped away the color. Caleb felt Atlas go still. Megan stared at the mark. Caleb, where did you get him? County shelter in Aurora. 18 months ago. No chip. No history. Atlas looked from Ruby to the distant field beyond the fence. Then he pulled gently against the lead. Not toward the rescue building. Toward the old Carter property. Daniel closed the folder. Nobody goes anywhere until I finish here. Caleb kept his eyes on Atlas. The dog had begun the same pattern again. Field. Caleb. Field. Ruby watched him from beside the county van. Victor glanced toward the locked gate, and for the first time that evening, the confidence left his face. Caleb saw it. Atlas did too. The trunk had revealed a dog, but the truth was waiting beyond the fence. Daniel finished securing the paperwork before allowing anyone near the Carter property. Victor remained beside his sport utility vehicle, speaking quietly with an attorney, while Ruby was placed inside the county van with water, a clean blanket, and the carrier door left open. Atlas watched until she settled. Then he turned toward the field again. The old gate stood beyond the rescue center fence, its purple flower emblem barely visible beneath rust and dust. Daniel unlocked the service entrance between the two properties and motioned for Caleb to follow. Megan came with them, carrying a flashlight and a folder containing the rescue center's original land maps. Atlas moved ahead on a short lead, nose low, pace steady. The path crossed nearly half a mile of dry grass before reaching the abandoned farmhouse. Evening had settled fully by then. The windows reflected the last gray light, and cottonwood leaves moved softly across the yard. Nothing about the place looked dangerous. It looked forgotten. Atlas ignored the front steps. He led them around the house, toward a long wooden barn near the back fence. A padlock hung from the door, newer than the weathered boards around it. Daniel photographed it before using the key recovered from Victor's folder. The lock opened. Inside, the air smelled of cedar shavings, old paper, and dust. Rows of empty kennel gates lined one wall. On another hung framed photographs of German shepherds standing beside families, veterans, and children. Atlas stopped beneath the largest frame. Caleb raised the flashlight. The photograph showed a younger Atlas in a green field, his sable coat darker, his ears high. Beside him stood a girl in a purple jacket, one hand resting on his shoulder. The brass plate beneath the frame read Atlas and Lily Carter, Junior Handling Day. Caleb felt the lead loosen in his hand. Atlas sat and stared up at the picture. Megan covered her mouth. It is him. Daniel examined the remaining frames, then the filing cabinets along the rear wall. Most drawers were empty, but one had been left slightly open. Inside were breeding records, microchip registrations, and property documents arranged by year. Ruby's registration appeared in the newest folder. Atlas was listed as her sire. The ownership signature belonged to Helen Carter. A second set of documents transferred the dogs and Parcel 17 to Victor Langley Holdings, but the dates did not align. One form had been signed months after the county recorded Helen's move to assisted living. Another listed Lily, then 10 years old, as a consenting witness. Daniel placed each page into evidence sleeves. "This is not a clerical problem," he said. Caleb found a ledger on the workbench. Payments from Victor's company appeared beside the names of former kennel employees, title agents, and one private transport service. The final entry carried that morning's date. Ruby, private relocation. Megan looked toward the rescue center lights beyond the field. "He wanted this land too." Daniel nodded. "If the Carter transfer stood, his company would control both parcels. Your donation agreement would complete the line." The money had never been charity. It was the final key to a larger acquisition. Atlas moved deeper into the barn and stopped beside a low cabinet. He scratched once at the door. Caleb opened it. Inside lay an old red leash, a child's purple knit glove, and a stack of letters tied with twine. The top envelope was addressed to Lily Carter. "Return if undelivered." Caleb handed it to Daniel unopened. Footsteps sounded outside. Victor stood in the doorway with his attorney several feet behind him. His polished shoes were dusty from the field. "Those records are company property," he said. Daniel turned calmly. "Then you can explain why they were hidden on land your company does not legally own." Victor looked at the folders, the photograph, and Atlas sitting beneath Lily's image. For the first time, he seemed to understand that the dog had connected every piece without knowing what any document meant. He took one step into the barn. Atlas rose and placed himself between Victor and the cabinet. No growl. No bark, just a steady wall of sable fur. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's back. "You should stay where you are." Victor stopped. Outside, another patrol car turned through the gate. Daniel lifted the ledger from the table. "The truth is not in your trunk anymore," he said. "It is all over this barn." Atlas looked up at Lily's photograph, and Caleb knew the next person they needed to find was not a lawyer, a donor, or a developer. It was the girl who had once called this dog home. By midnight, the barn had become a place of quiet evidence instead of forgotten dust. Daniel's team photographed every folder, every ledger entry, every altered signature. Victor was escorted back to the parking lot with his attorney, not in handcuffs, but no longer in control. His vehicle remained where Atlas had stopped it, the trunk still open beneath the cold lights. Ruby stayed with County Animal Services, though the technician allowed Atlas to remain near her carrier until she fell asleep. Caleb sat on the edge of the rescue center steps with one hand resting on the German Shepherd's shoulder. Atlas did not relax. His eyes kept returning to the old photograph Daniel had placed inside a clear evidence sleeve. Lily Carter. The name seemed to carry a weight the dog remembered even if no one else yet understood it. Megan joined Caleb with 2 cups of coffee. "Daniel found a current address," she said. "Helen Carter is an assisted living outside Lakewood. Lily lives with her now." Caleb looked toward the field. "How far?" "About 40 minutes. The answer was enough. At sunrise, Daniel arranged for Helen and Lily to come to the rescue center rather than sending Caleb to their home. He wanted the reunion documented properly, and he wanted Helen present before any decisions were made about Atlas or Ruby. The morning arrived pale and cool. Dew silvered the grass. The rescue dogs stirred behind the kennels as a small blue sedan turned into the lot. Atlas heard it before Caleb did. His head lifted. His body went still. Helen Carter stepped from the passenger's side, thin but upright, wrapped in a navy coat. Lily came around from the driver's side. She was 12 now, taller than the girl in the photograph, with dark blonde hair pulled into a loose braid and a purple scarf around her neck. Atlas stared at her. Lily saw him and stopped. Neither moved. Caleb loosened his grip on the leash, but did not release it. "Take your time," he said. Lily's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. "Atlas." The German Shepherd's ears rose. For one long second, he seemed caught between memory and disbelief. Then he walked forward. Not running, not pulling, just one careful step after another. Lily knelt before he reached her. Atlas lowered his head beneath her hand exactly as he had in the photograph. The leash slipped loose from Caleb's fingers. Lily pressed her face into the sable fur along his neck. Atlas leaned against her with the full weight of trust restored. Helen covered her mouth. Megan turned away to wipe her eyes. Caleb stayed where he was. The moment did not belong to him. After a while, Lily reached for the worn collar and found the faded flower pressed near the buckle. "I made this," she whispered. Helen nodded. "You painted it purple." Atlas looked toward the county van. Ruby had begun to whine softly from inside. Lily rose and followed the sound. When the carrier door opened, Ruby stepped out and moved immediately toward Atlas. Helen saw the purple flower tag and closed her eyes. "That belonged to my husband," she said. "He used it on every dog from the farm." Daniel showed her the registration records and the transfer forms. Helen read them slowly. "I never sold the kennel," she said. "Victor offered. I refused." Lily looked from Ruby to Atlas. "Then why did Atlas disappear?" Helen's face tightened with old grief. 2 years earlier, a transport company had arrived with documents claiming temporary authority to relocate several dogs during a property dispute. Atlas vanished the same week. Helen had filed reports, but the records had been redirected, and the farm's legal ownership became buried under paperwork she could not afford to challenge. Ruby had been born after that, hidden in a private facility under Victor's company name. Caleb looked toward the black sport utility vehicle across the lot. Victor had treated dogs, land, and loyalty as entries on the same balance sheet. Atlas had answered in the only language he needed. Helen rested a hand on Caleb's arm. "You believed him." Caleb watched Atlas stand between Lily and Ruby, calm at last. He made it hard not to. Daniel closed the evidence folder. "The land transfer is suspended. The county will review everything." The rescue center's agreement with Victor was void before Megan ever signed it. Helen's property had not yet been restored, but for the first time in 2 years, the truth had witnesses, records, and a dog who had refused to move. The county review began the following week, and the rescue center changed with it. Reporters gathered near the road. Volunteers answered questions between feeding schedules. Megan kept the doors open and the routines steady, refusing to let attention turn frightened animals into a spectacle. Caleb did the same for Atlas. The German Shepherd stayed close to Lily whenever she visited, but he still returned to Caleb's side when work began. It was as if he understood both parts of his life had finally met. Ruby remained under county care while ownership was verified, though Helen was allowed supervised visits. Each time she entered the recovery room, Ruby lifted her head and moved toward the purple flower tag on Helen's keyring. Atlas watched from the doorway, calm but alert. The resemblance between them became clearer every day. The same amber eyes, the same dark saddle along the back, the same habit of touching a person's hand before settling. Daniel brought updates in a plain folder and avoided promises he could not guarantee. "The signatures were altered," he said one afternoon. "The transport orders were issued through a company connected to Victor's development group. The title records were filed through 3 separate offices." Helen sat at the rescue center's old conference table, her hands folded over a walking cane. "Can the farm be returned?" Daniel answered carefully. "The transfer is frozen. That is not the same as restored, but it is a beginning." Lily stood near the window with Atlas beside her. Caleb watched the girl absorb every word without asking for certainty. She had already learned how expensive false promises could become. Megan placed Victor's unsigned donation agreement on the table. "What happens to this?" Daniel looked at it. "Nothing. It was never completed." Caleb glanced toward the roof where rainwater had stained the ceiling tiles. The center still needed repairs. The kennels still needed heat before winter. Losing Victor's money meant the danger had not disappeared. It had only changed shape. That evening, Megan gathered the staff and explained the truth. No dramatic speech. No hidden numbers. The rescue center had 6 weeks of operating funds. Without help, programs would be reduced. Caleb expected fear. Instead, volunteers began making calls. A local hardware store offered roofing materials. A veterinary group covered Ruby's medical care. Former Marines from Caleb's old network organized a weekend repair crew. By Saturday morning, the parking lot was filled with pickup trucks instead of luxury vehicles. Men and women climbed ladders, replaced damaged boards, painted kennels, and repaired the senior dog yard Victor had planned to clear. Helen arrived with coffee. Lily carried a box of purple ribbons she had cut by hand. She tied one to the gate for every person who came to help. Atlas moved through the crowd without a leash, greeting familiar faces and returning often to Caleb. Ruby watched from a shaded pen nearby, stronger now, her tail moving whenever Atlas passed. Near noon, a black sedan stopped at the edge of the lot. Victor stepped out with his attorney. He carried no checkbook this time. Daniel met him before he crossed the gate. The conversation was quiet, but everyone saw Victor look at the repaired roof, the volunteers, and the purple ribbons moving in the wind. "Your board will still need funding," he said to Megan. "My offer can be revised." Megan held the unsigned agreement in both hands. For one moment, the whole parking lot seemed to wait. Then she tore it once down the middle and placed the pieces into the recycling bin beside the office door. "We already found the cost," she said. "It was too high." Victor looked toward Caleb. Atlas stood at his left side. Ruby stood behind the fence with Lily. Helen rested one hand on the open gate. No one raised a voice. No one blocked his path. There was simply nothing left for him to purchase. Victor returned to the sedan and drove away. Atlas watched until the car disappeared beyond the cottonwoods, then turned toward Ruby. The young shepherd met him at the fence. Their noses touched through the wire. Caleb looked across the restored yard, the patched roof, and the ribbons along the gate. The land had not yet been legally returned, but something else already had been. The people who had once been divided by paperwork were standing together, and Victor's money no longer had the power to make them look away. 3 weeks later, the county released its first formal findings. The Carter property transfer had been filed with altered signatures. The kennel records had been redirected through companies tied to Victor's development group, and Ruby's transport had been arranged without lawful ownership. The news arrived on a clear Monday morning while Caleb was repairing a gate hinge behind the rescue center. Daniel crossed the yard carrying a folder beneath one arm. Atlas rose from the shade and walked to Caleb's side. Ruby stood inside the recovery pen with Lily, stronger now, her sable coat clean and bright beneath the sun. Helen waited near the porch, one hand resting on her cane. Daniel did not smile, but his voice carried relief. "The court has voided the transfer." Helen looked toward the old Carter field beyond the fence. "The farm, back in your name." Lily pressed both hands over her mouth. Ruby leaned against her leg. Atlas remained still until Helen spoke his name. Then he crossed the yard and stood before her. She rested one hand between his ears. "You brought it home," she whispered. The county also returned legal ownership of Ruby to Helen and Lily. Victor's companies were barred from selling or developing either property while the remaining investigation continued. He had not been convicted of anything yet, and Daniel reminded everyone that the process would take time. But the land, the dogs, and the records were no longer under his control. That was enough for the day. They walked to the Carter property that afternoon. The old gate opened with a long metal groan. Grass had grown high along the driveway, and dust covered the farmhouse windows, but the purple flower emblem still clung to the sign near the road. Lily ran her fingers over its faded edges. Atlas stepped through first. Ruby followed close behind. The two German shepherds moved across the field together, stopping often to study the scents left by wind, rabbits, and years of absence. Caleb stayed near Helen. "Are you planning to reopen the kennel?" he asked. She shook her head. Not the way it was. Her husband had once raised working dogs for families, farms, and service programs. After everything that happened, Helen did not want to begin breeding again. Instead, she offered the barns and several acres to the rescue center for rehabilitation, training, and temporary housing. Megan stood beside the old well, looking across the field. "This could give us room for every senior dog on the waiting list." Helen nodded. "Then that is what it should do." Lily found the old red leash inside the barn cabinet and clipped it to Atlas's worn collar. She walked him toward the house, but halfway there he stopped and looked back at Caleb. The distance between them was 50 yards. Caleb did not call him. This choice belonged to Atlas. The dog looked at Lily, then at Caleb, then turned toward Ruby. He touched his nose to the young shepherd's cheek before returning to Lily's side. Caleb felt pride and loss move through him together. Helen saw it. "He remembers both homes," she said. "A dog can do that." They agreed Atlas would live at the farm with Lily and Ruby, but he would spend several days each week at the rescue center with Caleb. His calm presence had already helped frightened dogs approach food, accept a leash, and trust an open hand. No one wanted to ask him to choose between the life he had found and the family he had lost. At sunset, volunteers arrived with lumber, tools, and fresh paint. They repaired kennel doors and cleared the path between the barn and the rescue center. Lily tied purple ribbons along the new fence line. Ruby chased their shadows through the grass, while Atlas watched from the porch. Caleb replaced the final broken board at the gate. When he finished, he stepped back. The gate swung freely, neither locked nor chained. Atlas came down the steps and sat beside him. Beyond them, Ruby rested near Lily, and Helen watched from the porch beneath the fading gold light. Caleb placed a hand on Atlas's shoulder. The dog leaned into him, then rose and walked back toward the girl. He had not chosen one home over another. He had simply made the road between them safe. By late summer, the Carter farm no longer looked abandoned. Fresh paint covered the barn doors. The purple flower sign had been restored, and new fencing divided the open fields into quiet spaces for recovery, training, and rest. The rescue center had moved its senior dog program into the eastern barn, while the main building across the field remained open for medical care and adoption. Every morning, volunteers crossed the path between the two properties carrying food bowls, clean blankets, and leashes. Atlas learned the new routine quickly. 3 days each week, he walked beside Caleb to the rescue center and helped nervous dogs settle into unfamiliar rooms. The rest of the time, he stayed at the farm with Lily and Ruby. He never seemed confused by the arrangement. At sunrise, he waited by whichever door mattered most. Caleb began arriving earlier than necessary. Sometimes he told himself it was because the fence line needed inspection or because the younger dogs required extra work. The truth was simpler. The farm had become the first place in years where he did not feel as though he was waiting for a mission to begin. There was always something small to repair, someone to guide, or an animal learning that an open hand did not always mean fear. Ruby grew stronger under Helen's care. Her coat brightened, her steps became confident, and the tired silence she carried from the trunk slowly disappeared. She followed Atlas everywhere, copying the way he sat beside a frightened dog without crowding it, the way he waited before entering a doorway, the way he looked back to make sure Lily was near. One afternoon, a young hound mix named Benny arrived after spending months moving between temporary homes. He refused food, avoided eye contact, and pressed himself against the far wall of the recovery pen. Caleb sat outside the gate for nearly an hour without speaking. Atlas lay beside him. Ruby settled a few feet away. Nothing happened at first. Then Benny lifted his head. Atlas did not move. Ruby gave a quiet sigh and rested her chin on her paws. Benny took one step forward. By sunset, he had crossed half the pen. Caleb left a bowl near the gate and walked away. The next morning, it was empty. Lily watched from the porch. Atlas taught him, she said. Caleb shook his head. Atlas gave him time. Lily smiled. That sounds like teaching. The investigation into Victor's companies continued in the background, but his name carried less power with each passing week. The court placed the remaining disputed properties under review, several contracts were canceled, and the county opened a formal inquiry into the title office that had processed the altered records. Daniel stopped by once a week with updates, never promising more than the facts allowed. Victor no longer appeared at the rescue center. His black sport utility vehicle became only a memory reflected in old phone videos and evidence photographs. No one celebrated his fall. There was too much work to do. Near the end of August, the center held its first open house day at the restored farm. Families walked through the barns, veterans met retired working dogs, and children tied purple ribbons along the fence. Megan placed the unsigned donation agreement inside a glass case near the entrance, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what the center had almost accepted. Beneath it stood a simple card. Some gifts asked for too much in return. Caleb found Atlas near the far gate as the sun lowered over the field. Ruby rested beside him, and Lily sat in the grass with one hand on each dog. Beyond them, Benny walked calmly beside a new foster family. Caleb leaned against the repaired fence. Atlas looked up, rose, and crossed the short distance to stand at his left side. For a moment, Caleb saw the parking lot again, the polished vehicle, the closed trunk, and the quiet certainty in the dog's eyes. He rested a hand on Atlas's neck. "You knew before any of us," he said. Atlas looked toward Lily, then Ruby, then the open gate. Caleb understood. The dog had not known the laws, the forged documents, or the value of the land. He had only known that something living should not be carried away in silence. Sometimes that was enough to begin justice. Autumn came quietly to the Carter farm, turning the cottonwoods gold and laying cool mist across the fields before sunrise. The rescue center had survived the season. The roof no longer leaked. The senior dogs slept in warm kennels. The open house ribbons had faded in the weather, but Lily refused to remove them from the fence. Each one marked a day when someone had chosen to help without asking for ownership in return. Caleb arrived early on the morning the county delivered its final ruling. Daniel met him beside the barn with a thin folder and a cup of coffee. Atlas and Ruby followed Lily across the yard, moving through the grass in easy rhythm. Helen stood on the porch beneath a wool blanket, watching the sun climb over the restored purple flower sign. Daniel opened the folder. Victor Langley's development group had lost its claim to both properties. The remaining contracts connected to the altered records had been canceled. Restitution funds would support the rescue center's land and medical programs. Victor still faced a long legal process, but his influence over the farm, the shelter, and the dogs had ended. Caleb listened without satisfaction or anger. The result felt less like victory than the closing of a door that should never have been opened. Megan joined them near the gate. "Does this mean the center is safe?" Daniel nodded. "The land is protected under a charitable trust. No developer can force a sale without court approval." Helen looked toward Lily. "Then it belongs to the work now." By noon, volunteers gathered beneath the cottonwoods to place a new sign beside the open gate. It carried no company logo and no donor's name. Only 4 words were carved into the wood: Carter Farm Recovery Grounds. Beneath them, Lily had painted a small purple flower. Atlas sat beside her while Ruby tried to catch falling leaves. Caleb fastened the sign to the post, then stepped back. The gate swung inward with a soft creak. No lock, no chain. Beyond it, families walked between the barns. Veterans worked with retired service dogs, and frightened animals learned that kindness could arrive without conditions. Later, when the crowd had gone, Caleb found Lily sitting on the porch steps with Atlas resting beside her. Ruby slept nearby, curled against the railing. "Do you think he remembers the parking lot?" Lily asked. Caleb sat on the step below her. "Probably. Do you think he knew what was inside the car?" "He knew someone needed him." Lily looked at the old German shepherd. "That sounds like enough." Caleb smiled. "It usually is." As evening settled over the farm, Helen lit the porch lamps. Megan closed the office. Daniel drove away along the gravel road, his taillights fading between the trees. Caleb stayed to repair one last loose board near the western fence. Atlas followed him, then stopped halfway across the yard. Lily called from the porch. Ruby lifted her head. For a moment, Atlas stood between the 2 places that had shaped his life. The rescue center lay beyond the field, where Caleb had given him purpose after loss. The farmhouse glowed behind him, where Lily and Ruby waited beneath the warm light. Caleb did not call. He had learned that loyalty was not measured by which direction a dog chose first. Atlas looked toward Caleb, walked to him, and pressed his shoulder against the Marine's leg. Then he turned and crossed back toward Lily. Caleb followed at an easy pace. At the porch, Ruby rose to greet them. Lily opened the screen door. Atlas paused only long enough to look toward the field one last time before stepping inside. The black sport utility vehicle, the unsigned check, and the closed trunk were gone from the story of the place. What remained was simpler: a repaired roof, an open gate, 2 German shepherds resting near a girl who had found them again, a former Marine standing in a doorway he no longer felt outside of. Beyond the windows, the wind moved through the purple ribbons along the fence, and not one of them carried a price.